Hi, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are joining us from. My name is Abhijit Bhaduri. Thank you for being with me. And I can promise you a wonderful next 60 minutes are going to be really super. Um, I am working here in out of Bangalore as a leadership coach. I also work with organizations as a social media strategist. But what really I look forward to is the conversations that I have with some of the most interesting authors, economists, film stars, all kinds of people who have been on my show as I think about it, from CEOs to sports people. And well, today I'm going to talk to you about this book. Actually, I have, this person who's written this book. So maybe I should give you a little heads up about what Sudipta Sarangi is all about. Professor Sudipta Sarangi is actually teaching economics at Virginia Tech University. And at Virginia Tech, he's also the head of the department. And he's got this fabulous book. He's, besides being a really super accomplished economist, he's worked with the World Bank, FAO, multiple other places. And he's a globe-trotting guy. But what actually makes him really interesting is this book where he's trying to take really complex ideas of economics and turn them into really easy to understand ideas, that things that you and I can use. So let's get started, and I'm going to invite him. All right. So, Professor Sarangi, thank you so much for being with us. And, I'm delighted to have you, with us on this particular show. Which city are you joining us from?
Greetings, Abhijit, and I am joining you all from the mountains of Southwest Virginia, a place called Blacksburg, Virginia.
All right. Okay. So look at the comments that have started coming in. Vineet Vikram says another kick-ass live session. Oh, of course. So no pressure, Sudipta. You have to live up to this expectation that our viewers have. And there's somebody who's joining us from Micah, who we heard you when you were there as part of the Manthan session, and looking forward to a stimulating conversation. Super. So let's get started. By the way, I was telling people about this book that you've written. A couple of things that really got me intrigued about this book. First of all, you got some really impressive people. Arvind Subramaniam says that it's daring, illuminating, and entertaining. Yeah, so that's him, one economist. And then you also have Kaushik Basu, another, sterling economist of our times. He's said great things about you. And then when you look at this book at the back cover actually has some more interesting things. Why are all the good mangoes exported from India? Why should we pay our house help more? Why should we hesitate to reach out for that last piece of cake in a gathering? Why should we? I'm just curious because wherever things like that happen, when there is just one piece of cake which is there, why do people hesitate? I certainly hesitate. You don't want to look like the person who's being greedy. But tell me more about that. Why is it that people
So,
hesitate?
so at the heart of this lies something very important called the epistemology of knowledge. Okay, and the epistemology of knowledge is a field of study that's at the intersection of philosophy, computer science, and economics. It tells us when we know something. So my explanation for why we leave the last piece of cake is, first I have to distinguish between when we do that. So if we are in an office setting or you are with relatively unknown people or acquaintances, then you're going to do that. At home, you don't do that. Okay? At home, you probably fight your siblings for that last piece of cake or that last samosa or gulab jamun or whatever it is, right? So this is not at home. This is with people where it is important to tell them that you are not greedy, that you care about others, and that you are polite. But the story doesn't end there. What really matters is that if you take away that last piece of cake, people will know you've taken it away. But if you leave it there, you have told people that you are not selfish. And everybody that leaves it there is telling the others that they are not selfish. But that doesn't help. We need to know that the other person knows you're selfish. By leaving it there, now I know that you are not selfish, and you know that I know you're not selfish. That is important. Because if you don't know that I have understood that piece of information, there is a problem, right? And so this chain that I know that you know that you know that I know can go on and on, right? And so everybody knows that everybody knows that everybody knows that we are all good people and kind people. That's why we need to leave it there. Otherwise, you could say, well, nobody wants to eat it, put it in the refrigerator. We don't do that. We leave it out there for everybody to see, so that everybody knows ad infinitum that they are good people.
So we've got a question from.
Problems, if we don't do this, this causes many problems.
So there is a question from KV Sriram who wants to know if this is game theory at play.
Absolutely. This is not, I wouldn't call this game theory at play. This is more like, knowledge, understanding what is an event. We're trying to make people understand that this is what happens. I mean, for example, people have studied sociological cultures. Why do we have round tables at meetings? So we can all acknowledge each other. We can create that awareness, right? So there are other things like, religious ceremonies like Native American kiva. Again, that's circular. You can also think of, there are movies where you find that there is an attempt to create knowledge. So the Byzantine general problem in computer science, those of you who are familiar with computer science, is a version.
No, I'm not. So please educate me. What is the Byzantine general problem?
So I will not go. So the Byzantine general problem is very complicated. I'll give you the simple version. So there are two generals. The Byzantine general problem is a generalization of this. There are two generals who are parked on two hills, okay, and they have their armies. The enemy is in the valley in between.
Okay.
So General A sends a message to General B. Let's attack tomorrow at 6 a.m. We have to coordinate the attack, otherwise they fail, right? But the messenger has to pass through the enemy lines. So there's a small probability the messenger does not make it.
Okay.
So now General A sends the messenger, but given that the probability that the messenger doesn't make it, General A doesn't know if B got the message.
Right.
So he must confirm the message.
Right.
So that message has to go back. But then again, because of the possibility that there is a failure, he may not make it. So B must know that A got the message, which means A has to send confirmation back. So that's why if you go to WhatsApp or Messenger, it shows message delivered. It shows message read. Otherwise, you don't know that the other person has understood what you want to communicate with them.
Oh, absolutely. Those two blue ticks are vital, So, exactly. I remember somebody was talking about this example of one of the family WhatsApp groups. So it says that, the cousin, so this is one family group of lots and lots of people. And this person sort of gets a call from one of the cousins and says that very clearly, you are no longer a friend of mine. You don't care about your cousin, because when it comes to the other cousin, you wished the person at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I know that you saw this message at 6 o'clock because I saw those two blue ticks, but you wished me only at 10 o'clock at night. So
there you go. So this is exactly, now we all know what we know, right? And this is at the heart. So, if the generals don't know what time they have to attack, it will fail. Yeah. So you can imagine this is a big area of study and so the Byzantine general problem is about N generals.
Sure.
Right? Yeah, it's more complicated, yeah.
When I went to college and I studied economics as well, for me, economics was, at that point of time, it was all about very large problems. And, this, you talk about demand supply curve, this and that. I mean, a lot of it. But when I read your book, I read it like a person who's a lay person. And I found that this book was really fascinating because, from everything that I look at, I look at this, the chapter that opens up is this little story, which is about pens in the pocket. Why do we carry pens in the pocket? My God, so why do we carry pens in the pocket? You should tell our viewers, because I found that really fascinating. So why do we? What does that mean?
So the idea of pens in the pocket, I'll tell you the chapter.
Is it a good thing or not? Because then I'll put a pen in my pocket and, is it a good thing?
I will argue it's a good thing. I will
Okay,
argue
all
it's a
right.
good
So
thing.
I'm going to leave it here.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. I think it's very important. Although I'm not sure that you need to do that. We'll come back to that in a minute. So
Okay,
for
I'm
me
going to
to
take it
say
off.
that, no, keep it.
Okay.
My point is that, of course, nowadays it's not very popular. But it's time when I was growing up, and this is, pre-liberalization India. This was a very common thing. People like to carry pens, and Waterman and Parker, and some of these names that you would hear, Mont Blanc. Very prized possessions, and for college students, there was the Chinese versions like Wing Sung, Hero. I found that you can even go on eBay now, and so a friend of mine were having a conversation about these times, and you can go on eBay and find Hero and Wing Sung pens and so on. So they would have these little cartridges, and they were better than the average fountain pen. The Suleika, you have the Indian fountain pen, Camlin, Suleika ink. These are things probably most people today don't know, but there was a reason for this. In pre-liberalized India, jobs were scarce, education opportunities were even scarcer. Okay, why? Because we didn't have the private sector in education. There was only one sector. Okay, and so what matters in those days was, given the scarcity of job, think about a prospective employer and think about a bunch of people who come out, say, look, I have an engineering degree. The employer has no idea about who to hire. You can say, I'm better than that person, I'm better than that person. How does the employer say, your engineering ability is not written here, right? It does not flash to the employer, this is the best person. So there's no way for the employer to judge these people. So one thing that people can do in such a situation is what exactly the peacock does, right? So the peacock has bright plumage because they're fighting over mates. The peahens
Yep.
are dowdy looking, right? So they're not looking very, they don't look very beautiful. They're just very ordinary looking birds. But the peacock has bright plumage. So it's the same idea. You want to signal, or you want to let your employer know that you are a person of high ability. That is why you go seek education. That's where it matters, right? So, and the higher the quality of the education institute you have gone to,
Right.
the better is the signal. And actually, the education might not be relevant, right? So you can do an engineering degree and then go into IAS to show that you have high ability because you did engineering and then did IAS. So
Right.
engineering degree may not be relevant to IAS. So signaling requires us to invest in showing our ability through some other strategy, which has to be, one, costly, and two, it may not even be relevant to the job at question. But it tells the employer, this is what you do. And that's the idea of signaling. So in pre-liberalization India, the pen in the pocket was a signal of people's ability that they belonged to the educated class.
Then I should remove it, that because I certainly don't have any ability, so I'm going to remove this.
No, I think in your case, it's slightly different. So I think what we were saying is that in the beginning, when it is very hard to distinguish between people, signaling is very important. But somebody who has already proven themselves, they don't need to do this. You've already signaled your ability. So we
Oh
know
my God.
about you.
But no. So I just think that, look at the lovely comments that have come in. There's somebody who actually says, it's amazing to see Sarangi live. I'm his Eklavya. And you also have somebody talks about love those hero pens. And Professor Preeti Shroff says hello from Micah. And so a whole lot of people who have joined in. And there's also Rangarajan Raghavachari says writing instruments market is in bad shape, and since the schools are closed and all of that. So, but I'm just you were talking about signal.
Can I throw out a puzzle for the audience?
Yes.
I will not answer it today. Some future
Okay.
day. Okay.
Okay.
So because of the Ekalavya comment. So Dronacharya asked Ekalavya to give him his thumb.
Correct.
Okay? There's a reason why Dronacharya asked. Why did Ekalavya agree? I want a rational answer for why Ekalavya agreed to give his thumb to Dronacharya, knowing what it would do to him. Okay. I will not answer. I will not dwell on this. I want to leave people with this puzzle.
Okay, so just to do a quick recap, Dronacharya was the person who was teaching the princes, whether it was Kauravas and the Pandavas in Mahabharata. They were, so he was the guru. He was teaching them archery. So as you know, so you got to sort of hold the bow and arrow. So when the people held the arrow, and they would need to hold it like this with their thumb and forefinger. So when Eklavya was not accepted as a formal student, but he learned nevertheless. Put a statue of Dronacharya, and he sort of learnt it. And when he proved his ability, through another example, his so Dronacharya says, if you really think I'm your guru, then you need to give me your thumb as Guru Dakshina, as a payment. Now, very clearly, there are many of these things which we can explain. So we have some people who are actually trying to respond. Eklavya always had a signal that he was better than Arjun, and that worried Dronacharya perhaps, and his severed thumb became a signal to the outside world that such a thing had happened. KV Sriram says it would help him get employed, So that's one. Tathagata Chatterjee says, Sriram, did you see Professor Sarangi laugh at that answer? So very clearly, one hint is that that's a signal. It's a signaling device that it's not the correct answer. And Tathagata Chatterjee says signaling his dedication is bigger than the achievement of the field. And there are some others. Eklavya had the perception that he can still do the same things without requiring the thumb, and maybe he had this was a signal for that. So let's not get distracted, because I was just trying to also read that you've got signaling and what incentives and like I'm trying to read the next one, product differentiation. Yeah, and then you have
price discrimination.
You're having a class clearly. So let's. So we are on to the first one very clearly, signaling. So explain to me in simple terms, signaling, if I understand that, it's a way of telling somebody that I matter. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And in some senses, when we wear a watch, I mean, there's one of the examples I give people that, when you wear a watch, you actually don't need a watch from the functional value, because there are hundreds of places your phone you can use to get the time, or there you can ask people. In India, we ask for directions liberally. You have multiple clocks in the home, your microwave or car, and all of that, depending on where you are operating. You have many things. At the same time, I think it's just also a way of telling people that I can afford this. I also think that when Pranav also has an answer, which I think Pranav Singh says he might as well do the same thing with the other hand. So I'm going to presume that what you mean is that he might as well use his other hand to be an archer and not chop off the other thumb as well. I presume that you meant that. But why do we need to signal? I mean, so is an MBA degree a signal, or is it a actual,
Okay, so I mean, as I said, so part of the reason you already explained, right? So the key idea here is that there is asymmetry of information. Some people know some things, the other people don't, and therefore to put people on the same level or to stand out from the others, you need to create a signal. For example, I mean, why do people in the police wear uniforms? Clothes make the man, right? So for law enforcement to be taken seriously, I mean, if I just go and claim I'm a policeman and I'm not in the uniform, you won't take me seriously. Whereas the person who's actually wearing the uniform will be taken seriously. So, see, again, I mean, just as you said, watch matters, right? So the same thing, clothes matter, school uniforms matter. There are all these reasons for why these things matter. So the best example, I think, in modern India is Oyo, right? What did Oyo do? Oyo basically said, look, there's a whole bunch of hotels and we don't know their quality. I'm going to create a certification template and certify them. That way, I have helped these little hotels signal their quality, and then you can judge the price quality ratio for yourself and go. So the key idea behind signaling is that it should be costly. If everybody can replicate a signal, then it's noise. Signal to noise ratio is important. So signal
Right.
has to be costly, and it has to reveal something about the person that's trying to get a trait, a message, or an idea across. So it can be a trait, it can be ability. It doesn't have to be ability. I mean, doctors take doctors go to medical school to show that they have degree. So you go to a better medical school to show that you have a higher degree. And often, and this is very true, it's a sad thing, but if you have come through in India the quota system or affirmative action, many times there's a social stigma attached to it, right? Because people think that, okay, this person went through a quota, that's like a opposite signal. So they somehow tend to associate lower ability with that. It need not be true. So there, the noise to signal ratio is not quite sure because it's confounded by a third factor.
Okay, so if I were to just summarize, you are saying that when we display our educational credentials, we are signaling to the job market that we are great, so we are very qualified. We are better than the others, So if you say that, you've got a PhD. By the way, you did not put Dr. Sudipta Sarangi in your name. I just noticed that. So why are you not signaling that, you are an accomplished economist, because you don't need to?
That's one thing. And also, I think it's not convention. And I'll be very frank here. So there is a gender bias. Okay.
Right.
So women often in many disciplines don't tend to be taken seriously. And I have seen this in my own life. They will refer to the male colleague as professor, and they will refer to the female colleague as miss. So you will see that when you are on Zoom and so on, you will see many academics in news, female academics, do stress the fact that they have a PhD because they need to. By virtue of the fact that I am at a university and I'm a full professor, I think that information reveals I must have a PhD.
You must have a PhD. So perfect. But on the other hand, you're not writing. Dr. Sudipta Sarangi is, making me feel a lot more equal, which otherwise would have never happened. I would have felt miserable that I'm talking to somebody who's so accomplished. You've got really fancy accomplishments. I'm just so envious. But now when you don't write Dr. Sudipta Sarangi, I say that, okay, he's not all that great. So this is another counter way to signal greatness, which is why when the billionaire actually tries to wear a pair of torn jeans, that's another signal that I'm like you. Don't think that I'm a billionaire and I'm no big deal. I'm like you. All right.
In fact, most successfully done by Donald Trump, right? I mean, so analysis of his language use shows, or at some point people had analyzed his vocabulary usage on his speeches. It seems like he was using something like 600 to 1,000 words, not bigger. Whereas, by contrast, Hillary Clinton's was a very big range, right? Why? Because he was trying to signal to his electorate that I'm one of you. Look, I talk the same way you do.
Yeah. I was reading that in one of the books that an anthropologist has written. So she talks about the fact that when someone makes a grammatical error, the educated people laugh at this person. But in some of the jobs, like a politician's job, it is actually a massive advantage because then you're telling people I'm like you. So, I'm not one of those fancy people who are wearing ties and boots and all suits and all that. So then, when the professor wants to create a difference between, let's say, himself or herself and the students, you sort of, flash that. But, in some cases, you don't flash that. So the very accomplished person can do a reverse signal. You would wear, very simple clothes. So you could sort of do that.
I want to say something here because you pointed out something very interesting. When we have fresh PhDs, okay, and, fresh PhDs may not be very different from the students they are teaching in age. So we routinely tell them on first day of class, you need to create the distance. Otherwise, they will not take you seriously. So we tell them dress formally for the first few lectures. Wear a suit if you're especially important for women. That wear formal attire. Be very serious. Later, towards the end of the semester, you can joke. But in the
Okay.
beginning, you need to establish this boundary that I am not you. Because
Right.
maybe
Right.
I'm 2, 3 years older than you, but you know what? I have a PhD, I've done all this studying, and now I'm teaching you. So you're absolutely right. This is very important. And early on in your careers, this is more important.
So to be taken seriously, which is why at the campus I notice when people go for job interviews, even if it means borrowing a jacket from somebody and wearing that, that's what I did.
Yeah.
I borrowed somebody's jacket because I didn't have a suit, so
Yeah.
I wore that and then went across for the interview. You say that, and then as soon as you are done with the interview, you take off the tie and jacket.
Exactly.
So, and you notice in many of the cultures of organizations, they have a formal dress code. I mean, bankers, investment bankers, etc.
Yeah.
It builds trust that okay, this person can handle my money. Or
Yeah.
for that matter, another thing that I was thinking of is imagine that one of your loved ones is going in for surgery, and your surgeon has been brought in because he or she is an accomplished person, and you see a whole lot of tattoos and nose rings and all of that. It may not have any kind of a bearing on the qualification or skill, but it can worry some of the people. Yeah, so I think okay, so that's a great. What can let's say somebody who's not had a great track record yet, early stages of career, on a LinkedIn, what are some of the things that people can do to signal that they are better than the others? What are some devices?
So I would say, in today's world, there are some opportunities which did not exist before, right? So, for example, showing micro credentials. But again, you want to be careful here. You want to invest in micro credentials that are expensive because, if this is a free micro credential, what's the value, right? I mean, if you can get a certificate by switching on the computer and let the course play, and while you are, I don't know, having a glass of whiskey or cooking dinner or whatever, that's not going to count. So if you need to build up, then what you can do is go for micro credentials, go for things you can show your strength. First of all, you should know your strengths. That's very important. Self-awareness is very important. So invest in things that will show your strengths and try to get certification, right? Because certification, that's the beauty of micro credentials. They don't take a lot of time. But related to signaling is the idea of screening, right? I can talk about that if you want. So look at these opportunities, vet them carefully, and go for the ones that the market will value. Don't just spend your time and money in anything and everything just because it's there.
Right.
And then try to present information in a way that's easy on the eyes. I think it's very important that whatever information you're putting out, how it looks on the screen, you should look at that. You should print it and look at that. So this is one of the first lessons I learned in my PhD. My advisor has an extremely messy office. You cannot enter. Nobody has meetings in his office. We have to go somewhere else. So one of the first things he told me was, imagine, so as a PhD, you write papers, right? So that's your main job. So you write research papers. Imagine that the person who has to read your paper has an office like this, okay? Like his office. And your paper is competing for attention in that space. That's what you need to keep in mind. So when you're writing your resume, that's the issue. Employers are looking at hundreds of applicants. Yours must stand out. So all the important information, that's what I tell my students, those who work with me, all important information should be visible in 30 seconds to the naked eye, whether it's in the print version or on the screen. If I can't see what distinguishes you in 30 seconds from the others, then consider yourself buried in that pile of papers in Professor Hans Holler's office.
Okay, all right. And there's an interesting comment here. Sham has written that a friend of mine always used to wear full sleeve shirts to hide his arm tattoos. So that is a reverse way of hiding the signals, because if you have a tattoo here, it sort of people draw different conclusions.
Absolutely.
And wanted to hide it so as to not stand out. So signaling works both ways. I think one of the interesting dimensions. So, just to reset the room, I'm talking to Professor Sudipta Sarangi. He is the author of this absolutely fascinating book that I've finished reading. It's called The Economics of Small Things. We've taken a bunch of examples from that. It's a free-flowing conversation, but I'm just, we talked a little bit about signaling, and I'm sort of trying to look at the second word which is there, which is also something that I'm deeply curious about, which is incentives. And when you look at incentives, why, for HR people, I know that it matters a lot because as you devise, let's say, sales incentives, so you create compensation systems, the stock grants, which sometimes the startups will say we can't pay you a lot of money in cash, but we can give you stock grants, and in 1 year's time we'll be bigger than Google and Apple combined together, and so then you are going to be like multi-billionaire. So decide where you want to park your private plane. So those kind of dreams, when they sell, it's also a way of incentivizing people to join them, to give up what they would have otherwise been worried about. And it's a way of de-risking in some sense. But when you look at that, how do you describe incentives? What is your view of incentives?
So, I think, as all economists will tell you, and in fact, one of the things that I think that's very careful, that modern economics very carefully distinguishes itself from sociology, for example, is the understanding that sociology tends to think of human behavior in the collective as the group. Economists tend to think about the group, but more importantly, that behavior is down at the individual level. So we want to think about how the individual behaves, and that's another issue that relates to sort of leftist or Marxist economics, is that often the unit of analysis is not the individual. It's again the group or the collective, and which is not to say that they don't get things right. They do get things right, but by missing out on incentives which drive individual behavior, you miss out a lot. So, for example, as we all know, everybody responds to a higher salary package. But incentives don't necessarily have to be pecuniary. You can have non-monetary incentives. So,
give me an example of a non-monetary incentive.
Incentives. So, in the universities, for example, office with a window, corner office, because the corner office is big, right? So people fight over a corner office, or office with a window. And I'm sure this happens everywhere. As soon as you create a high rise, there is always fight for cubicle versus office. There is always fight for corner room, windows, or employee of the month, right? What is employee of the month? The whole idea is that you work in a group, or you are. I mean, if there was only you and another employee of the month would have no meaning, because who are you showing that off to? You can say we're customers, so maybe. But the real value of employee of the month, in the sense that it motivates people to work harder, is that it's a way of recognizing people amongst their peers, right? I mean, what is competitive sports? I mean, why do we give an Olympic medal? Why does it have so much value? It has so much value because you're recognized as the winner amongst a group of people. And also you are recognized as a winner, your country recognizes you, and all of that, right? So that's why non-monetary incentives, which are cheap ways of doing this, but work just as effectively, are important. So, and then of course we know about, incentivizing people through monetary incentives. One of the oldest ways of monetary incentives is sharecropping, right? So think about sharecropping. What does the zamindar tell the sharecropper? The zamindar says you bear, you do the labor, you get the crop, and I will take a certain percentage of it. Now there are certain advantages to this, because what you're doing is you're actually sharing some of the risk. Because if the crop is lower, if the output is lower, you're also getting a lower cut. Whereas if you give a fixed incentive, like you have to give me, this many quintals of rice, then you're not sharing in the risk. Okay, but of course, sharecropping can be extortionary. So these are ancient ideas of incentives to get people to work. When I give you sharecropping, then you say, okay, if my output is higher, then I get to keep a bigger part. The flat incentive is not a very good idea there. But the final word that I would like to stress on incentives is to say that incentives can have very unintended consequences, right? So one of the
There you go. That was what somebody has said just now in the comment, that unintended consequences. You are incentivizing a behavior, it sort of,
yeah,
gets,
yeah, yeah.
unintended
So
What kind of, give me an example of unintended consequence that you have said.
yeah, so I'll pick an old example and a new one. So and both are in the book, but you can find many. So
This is the book. Awesome. Go ahead.
thank you, Abhijit. So there's something called the Cobra Effect. The Cobra Effect.
I'm saying this because so that when you get all the royalty from all these extra sales, you will incentivize me for promoting the book. So I just hope that that's going to happen. So guys,
Absolutely.
remember, if you read that book and buy the book, remember to tell Professor Sarangi that it was recommended and I need to get a percentage. Right? Okay.
Done. Done.
Please talk
Done.
to me about the Cobra
Yeah.
Effect.
So the Cobra Effect is a story from the British Raj. It says that in Delhi, there were too many cobras, or so the British believed, and they decided to incentivize people, in and around Delhi. You bring me a dead cobra, and I give you money. So unfortunately, what happens? People, jugaad. So people
Yeah.
in and around Delhi, they started rearing cobras at home. Then they would
Okay.
kill a cobra and take it to the British government and say, "Look, here's a dead cobra. Give me money." Okay. So now in Delhi, so this is not verified, but in Vietnam, this has been studied by a historian and documented. In Vietnam, the problem was rats in Hanoi, and so the French decided to pay money for dead rats. Yeah, and so people started keeping rats at home. But what happens? What is the really bad part? At some point, the governments realized, wait a second, we screwed up. This is not really working. So they abandoned the policy. What happens when you abandon the policy? You might end up with more rats than you had before.
Because people let go all the rats.
Yeah, what are they going to do? Now there's no point in keeping those rats at home and feeding them and killing them. So let go. Or, if you're rearing snakes, do the same thing. The modern story is happened in during the middle of the Sudanese civil war. So there's a group in Switzerland which felt very bad for what was happening to women and children in Sudan. So they said, you know what, we're going to. So what was happening is one group was keeping the losers as slaves, even women and children, right? So if they took over the other group, they would keep them as slaves. They said, you know what, we're going to buy freedom. We're going to go and buy the freedom. So we're going to free these slaves by paying money. As you can imagine what it did, it increased the incidence of slavery. It's a little bit like Santa and Banta writing a contract and saying, today I'll be your slave, you buy my freedom, then tomorrow I'll take you, then I'll be your slave, right? And so
Right,
then in reverse, you buy my freedom.
Is this something? So somebody has a question here. Sriram wants to know that if there are incentives, does it always happen that individuals will try to game it? Is it?
Of course, I mean, Sriram, are you not trying to game incentives that are offered to you? Tell me not.
Yeah. And I'm answering on his behalf. I'm sure he is giving it. So no, I think see, you talked about the Cobra story. I actually have written about it in my book, Mediocre but Arrogant, and the sequel. So we have that story there, which says that cobras, except for the fact that I think I've talked about it in the context of a tribe called the Irulas, who actually do. They manage snakes and all that stuff. So, so we've talked about that. One of the things I would look at is, do incentives work within the family? And so a lot of parents say that when you do this, you get a certain kind of a grade, or you get a certain rank in school or college, you get a certain incentive, whether it's financial, that you get better pocket money, or you get a cycle, or this, or whatever is,
or a PlayStation. Today's kids want PlayStations and things like that. But okay, yeah.
Yeah, and then these incentives also, it depends on. So the incentive must be something that the other person deeply desires. Because if PlayStation is not something that I care about, then it doesn't incentivize me. So there's a precondition to that. But does it work within the family when parents sort of do that?
I think it works. I think incentives work with everyone, but I have very strong views on this, right? So, in fact, I even have a friend who does the following with her daughter. She actually creates these types of incentives for different things, and she also makes her understand the tax system. So every time the kid earns something, there's also a tax which the household then takes away from her, right? So and then she manages her own savings or whatever. But I don't want to. So I think that everyone has certain things that they have to do, like for instance, my job is to teach, and I don't want to incentivize myself for teaching my daughter. Okay, that's part of my responsibilities, or making sure that she gets on the bus in the morning. So I'm not going to incentive. So I have defined for my daughter a set of tasks for which she cannot be incentivized. Getting good grades is not something I'm incentivizing. That's her job. But every day, when now, after 1.5 years, we are back in the university, I'm actually sitting in my office in the university. So every morning, I think I have to look for my car keys, I have to look for my glasses, and I have to look for the watch and the phone. If she helps me with those things, I am willing to pay her. So that's not her job. So we have clear demarcations about responsibility, like, doing laundry or folding her clothes. She's not going to get paid for that. But if she finds our phone, helps us in searching for those things, then she can get paid.
So if you really wanted to, again, going ahead with this whole process of incentives, that means if you really wanted to incentivize her for something, then maybe you pretend to forget your phone, and then, she can find it. So that's another way you can game the system.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can have the gaming of the system, not just by, a process of the person who's going to get the incentive, but also the one who's doing it actually can game the system. So, a lot of sales incentives are designed like that you launch a new product and the people are already, they are going to sort of buy that. Or when, when, let's say, when you sell, luxury products, sometimes, you find that one of the ways it's done is you make the entire thing. So there's a combination of signaling, which is that it's at a very high-end mall. It costs a lot of money. It's out of reach. So it is, aspirational. Then you see some very fancy, the influencers who are saying that I use this particular shirt and therefore it can be,
something coveted. Yeah, it's something you want to covet. Yeah.
So, in which case, how does it change brands? I mean, is branding necessarily about incentivizing behavior, or is it a signaling process or a differentiation? Help me understand that. What does branding do?
Okay, so branding, I think they're all all these aspects are there, right? So just to take off from the what we call conspicuous consumption, or Veblen goods, right? So this was named after an economist called Thorstein Veblen. He wrote a book called The Theory of the Leisure Class. It's a fascinating book, very hard to read, because it's written at the turn of the 19th century. So the English is kind of old-fashioned. He used to be a professor of economics at Cornell, but fascinating book. So Veblen is the one who talked about conspicuous consumption and status goods and luxury items, and the theory of the leisure class. That's exactly why it's called the leisure class, aspirational goods, right? So if you really think about De Beers, who used to, at one point when Soviet Union existed, they basically had a diamond monopoly. With the collapse of Soviet Union, the diamond monopoly has eased a little. But De Beers came up with the idea, diamonds are forever. Why? Because if you think about the advertising tagline, there are two elements built into it. First, don't get rid of your diamonds. That helps them keep the monopoly, right? So if you buy diamonds, you have to hang on to them. Second, they are forever, right? So you need, other things are not forever. The diamond is forever. So you need to buy diamonds, okay? So this whole idea, for example, of an engagement ring, that it has to be diamond, this is just created in the market. It did not have to be a diamond. So this is part of creation of goods by creating an artificial scarcity or perception, by playing with your perception. But there are very simple other reasons, right? So you can think that Maggie. Why do I need 50 flavors of Maggie? Okay, because different people have different tastes. I, for instance, hate broccoli and will not eat anything that has broccoli remotely near it. But I will like gobi, so I'm quite happy to eat cauliflower, right? So just a simple point that
Gobi and broccoli are first cousins. You know that.
they're first cousins. That's why I'm saying.
It's just the same cauliflower dipped in green color, and it's called broccoli, and you hate it. See, look at the signaling process. It's just- sorry, I interrupted your train of thought.
No,
Please go ahead.
absolutely not. Yeah. So no. Taste-wise, they're absolutely different things. I'm willing to swear my life on it. So my point is simply that since different people have different tastes, we need to create a product range of varieties, right? So that we can appeal to when you come into the store again. Going back to asymmetric information, I don't know what exactly you will like, but I want your money. Okay, so suppose the ice cream seller down the street is offering vanilla, but I know that vanilla is not everybody's favorite flavor. So what I do, I say, you know what, I'm going to offer vanilla and chocolate both. So the people who
Mhm.
like vanilla will get maybe split up 50-50 between the other guy and me. But then people who like vanilla chocolate, they will all come to me. So I gain a much larger share of the market. So that's the idea behind differentiating your product, which is why I was saying that when you are creating your resume, you need to differentiate yourself, especially if you're an entry level person. You need to differentiate yourself from the rest of the pack. Okay? You need to stand out in some way, and you have to see how to do it. One way to do it in today's world is micro credentials, but volunteering is another thing. Finding mentors, are great mentors. That's important, and so on. But at the end of the day, the product has to be there. It cannot be just fake product
Fluff.
differentiation.
Yeah, yeah.
And there are interesting stories about product differentiation. For example, the FedEx one-day delivery, the overnight delivery, and the afternoon delivery, they both come on the same plane. Okay, but the guy, when he brings your morning delivery, he doesn't bring your afternoon delivery to you. Because if he did, what will everyone do? They'll say,
Why would you
I'll
pay
pay for
for extra?
exactly. If you figure this out, they know that, look, I mean, we all know that it comes with the same plane. So let me just pay for afternoon delivery. I'll get it in the morning anyway. That's why FedEx has to make sure that they hang on to your packet and only send it in the afternoon. Right. So similarly, in the old days, so I think this was the 486 microprocessor, for those of you who remember it, that used to come with a built-in math coprocessor. Okay, and in some models, to make it cheaper, they would shut off. So the chip was already built in. The software installed would shut off the math coprocessor.
Wow.
Okay, so firms, because it was cheaper to put the same chip into everything instead of designing different chips, so you put the same chip in, but you shut off the math coprocessor so that you can sell it for cheaper, because some people cannot afford that price and they
Sure,
really
sure.
want it. If I am not going to be doing have any heavy calculations, quote unquote, from those days, which probably now takes a second, uh, you know I just do it that way. So product
Yeah.
differentiation has a whole range of issues built into it. Baskin Robbins, 31 flavors.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and also if you look at it, frequent flyer miles, or so it just encourages loyalty in some way. Or Amazon does, Amazon Prime membership, that you will get it, the next day for free. I mean, your payment is already built in ahead of time, but you get a feeling that I'm getting it free because in 1 or 2 months you've forgotten that you paid a certain amount of, and if you brand it as a membership fee rather than advance collection of, let's say, delivery fee, then it just suddenly changes everything. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I
perception matters.
also think that when you look at, for people who are freelancers, so what can they do to, differentiate themselves? Because, when an employee says, I work for so and so company, the brand of that company rubs off on me.
Yeah.
As a freelancer, I have no such brand. Then what? So is that personal branding more important for, let's say, the gig workers or freelancers than, let's say, employees, or it's both?
No, I think it's important for both because so I can tell you, I write every now and then I write in Indian newspapers. It's not easy because I don't know the editors and so on. If I send them, but now I know several of them. But if I send them a cold piece by email, they will just not publish. I mean, for them, I'm a freelancer, right? And it's just difficult to get something in unless somebody recognizes you. So once you build up a portfolio, I mean, that's the other problem with digital is that communication has become cheap, and so people don't screen at all. But if I could once I show a portfolio, then you build up a reputation, you build up some sort of collection of works, right? So artists, right? Vincent van Gogh has this wonderful portfolio. He's no longer alive, but he would not have difficulty getting hired today. So
Correct.
I think freelancers, you have to have something that distinguishes you from people who have so freelancers are cheaper, that's their advantage, but they have to have something that gets their foot in the door and that gets them hired in the first place, and they need to distinguish themselves, if not for anything, from other freelancers, because there's competition in the market for freelancers too. So it's important for everybody.
Yeah, which is why when you go to a new neighborhood, you want to find out all the services in the neighborhood. You kind of say, who are the good doctors, who are the good pediatricians, who are, do you have a great medicine shop? So all of these services today, they are created through these WhatsApp groups where people will say, I have a tailor I recommend. I have this one I recommend. So does it mean that product reviews are important? Because that's one way in which you are getting that in a generic way. So LinkedIn therefore says you've got recommendations from various people. Yeah. Is that one of the ways in which you can differentiate, that you've got recommendations from various people?
Yeah. So I think what you're getting to is the idea of a referral system. More generally speaking, so that's again one way of distinguishing yourself from others, right? So which is why the small sellers on Amazon, even after you buy the product, will send you a personal email saying, hey, can you please evaluate my product, right? So if you read the book, you should go on Amazon and give it, write a review or give it a rating or whatever, right? So
I need an incentive. I need an incentive to do that. So
done, Abhijit.
Unless you are going to send me the share of that extra royalty, I have no incentive to do that. I've just learned from you because, it's written there, signaling, incentives, product, differentiation. And you also, there's another piece that you've written, price discrimination. I wanted to just get an idea of that, because we are in the last 8 minutes. So I want to also ask you about your favorite books, 3 or 4 books that you recommend to people. But no, tell me about what is price discrimination.
Price discrimination can basically take place in 2 ways, right? Or 3 ways, where the most perfect type of price discrimination is when every buyer comes in and the seller is able to charge that buyer whatever they're willing to pay. Now, this is very difficult because the buyer is not going to tell you. Why should they tell you, I'm willing to pay up to this much? Because then you are the sucker. They take all the money away from you. So that happens only in a world of perfect information, or when the buyer can look into your head and read your mind and so on. So let's rule that out. So other ways of price discrimination is to sell the same product at different prices. How do we do that? Senior citizens discount, right? So we know that not everybody may have the same ability to pay. So, for example, retired people have a different ability to pay, say, from compared to Abhijit, or say compared to my students,
or Professor Sudipta Sarangi,
or me, right? So, or my students, right? So, he and I, we are employed, we have jobs, we can pay a different price than, say, a person who's retired or a person who's still a student doesn't have a job. So firms will do things like show your senior citizen card. That's proof, right? It should not be transferable. Of course, what they also need to make sure that they limit it so that the senior citizen cannot buy 100 units of the thing and then sell it on the second-hand market, right? So price discrimination. So you sell the same product at different prices to different people, or you sell the same product but give quantity discounts, right? So if you buy 10 of the same kurta, then it becomes cheaper. Nobody buys 10 of the
Right.
same kurta, but say a t-shirt, right? If the
Right.
companies, if you buy 50 or coffee mugs, right? So if you order 1,000 of these coffee mugs, then it's cheaper, right? So that's
Right.
one example of price discrimination. The other way of doing price discrimination is to offer quality, right? So I don't know what the consumer wants, but I say I offer business class and I offer economy. And the idea is that the economy class should be sufficiently discomfortable or uncomfortable to make people want to travel in business. Because the idea is you don't want to make people in economy suffer. That's not the reason. The real reason is you want to make the person who's willing to pay the high price for business class not want to travel in economy. Because if you
Right.
make economy sufficiently comfortable, this guy's going to say, what the heck? I mean, there's not much difference between economy and business. I just pay the business economy ticket and travel on economy. So you really want to make the higher end product higher end. Otherwise, nobody is willing to pay for the higher end product. If the difference between them is not very high, then people will go for the lower end product. So that's
Which, in some sense, is the problem that you have with something like Premier Economy, which is kind of, just marginally more, and then, all that you have is a very little limited differentiation.
yeah.
But there are still people who would be willing to pay that extra amount. Why not take it? I guess
Yeah.
is the way
Yeah.
the
So,
airlines are looking at it.
yeah. So,
Um,
for example, in the US, what Premier Economy does very often, because now all checked in baggage has to be paid, in the US, what Premier Economy does is gives you free checked in baggage.
okay,
So,
okay. So,
then you say, okay, then I don't have to pay for the baggage. So I get a little better seating, a little wider and a little bigger, but I also get my bag checked in free. I'm not
right.
paying that extra. So things like that. And then, if you have a loyalty membership, then it earns a little more points.
Get
So,
it. So there are multiple ways to do that. Fabulous. I'm just curious to know, so that I don't miss the question. What is it? What are two or three of the books that you recommend people should read? What would be some of the books that have really impacted you? And it doesn't have to be books on economics, because and but it could be anything. What
yeah.
would those be?
So, I read all over the range, and I still read comics, and I read fiction, non-fiction. I mean, I get less and less time. For example, so I'm not going to probably name authors. I'm not probably going to name books, but I'm going to name some authors. So, for example, I really like Calvin and Hobbes. Okay, I'm very fond of Calvin and Hobbes. One book that I read in recent years, in the last few years, that I will say I really like is Peter Frankopan, History of the Silk Roads. Why? Because I'm a network theorist, and the history of the Silk Roads to me is a history of the world written from the perspective of networks. Because what he is basically saying in that book is that the Silk Roads is what bring new goods, new ideas, and also new diseases.
Okay, okay. So that's how diseases travel.
Exactly. If there was no trade, I mean, think about COVID. If there was no trade, if every country was an island by itself with no links, then nothing would happen. So I think so that's nonfiction, and I really like it. So, Old Man and the Sea. It's a very thin book. O. Henry writes. I mean, I think not O. Henry. Hemingway.
Ernest Hemingway.
Yeah, Hemingway in my mind is a fascinating writer because his sentences are short, they are crisp, and very powerful. So, Old Man in the Sea to me is one of the most powerful books ever written. It's very short.
And you mentioned O. Henry. I certainly think that his short stories are
Oh,
incredible.
they're fabulous, fabulous,
Fabulous short stories.
fabulous.
But I just want to, at the end of all of this, I just also want to really talk about, all the things. Think of all the things that people are saying. Sujoy Das Verma says that these are very thought-provoking insights. Yeah, I totally agree, and just want to tell the people that next Wednesday there is no LinkedIn Live, but we are to make up for it. We've got two amazing guys coming in, on 8th and 9th. So just so you know, you are going to have two people. So we will make up for it. But also, want to say thank you so very much to Professor Sudipta Sarangi. And this is the book that he's written. I really recommend check it out. If not for the economics insights, it is certainly, it is something that you should read, because it just shows such incredible, simplifies a lot of really fancy ideas, which so many economists have written very complex books. I find them really sort of worrying that they are so complex, but this is a great book. I really enjoyed reading it, and I think you will enjoy it too. Thank you so much for joining us, Sudipta. It was lovely chatting with you. Thank you.